This is a walkthrough through the exercises chapter for configuring the default settings in Liferay. In the video, in the actual course, I have talked a lot about configuring Liferay through Portal X properties. This is a long file that you can access on the internet or in your installation, but it requires a restart. So now this chapter with all of these exercises inspects Liferay on the user interface level with all of the settings that you can change there. We'll start with managing the modules in the user interface. If there are certain components that you want to deactivate, and just note that I'm running Tomcat here. I'm running my Liferay Tomcat 1 installation, and it's here. I'm already logged in as the administrator. Now let's continue. If I want to deactivate certain modules within this installation, I'll go to Control Panel, Configuration, and I'll go to Control Panel and the App Manager in Apps, and the exercises here ask us to look at the blogs application, and filtering them, we'll see that 3 apps match the term blog, and there's a lot of modules down here that also match. But we can also find these modules in the app containing them. So if I'm clicking on Liferay blogs, then I can see all of the modules that make up the Liferay blogs application. Now, looking at this, the exercises ask us to deactivate, for example, the Liferay blogs API. So clicking here and deactivating them will make sure that we don't have a blogs API anymore, and with it a lot of other modules won't be available, won't be functioning anymore now that this is deactivated. We can double check. And find our deactive or inactive, it's called resolved blogs API somewhere here. There's our blogs API, and the status is resolved. Why is this resolved and not inactive or something like that? Well, it's a term from the OSGI world, and modules that are resolved are ready to be started, but they're not started. And that's just because I've explicitly stopped it. Now, this is not the only way to deal with such a module. The other option that is documented within your exercises folder or exercises script is to access GoGoShell. GoGoShell is another OSGI component that is contained in Liferay, and if you remember the Portal X properties that we have configured when we set up this Docker container or this Docker image, we have activated GoGoShell. Now, for this, you will need a Telnet client on the operating system of your choice. We have the short instruction set of how to install Telnet on Windows in the written material. If you are running any other platform, just like I do, Telnet most likely is in there already, or you can just figure out quickly how to install Telnet. I can easily connect to the GoGoShell, which now gives me full access to the underlying OSGI runtime. Full access, no password. You might worry because this is the DevOps course, and rightly so. However, we have explicitly activated GoGoShell, which means it's typically not active, and it is only available on localhost, which means we don't make it available in any other machines anyways. Now, we'll check the status of the blogs module by just issuing one command on GoGoShell, and there's a heap of commands that you can learn, that you can use to inspect your system. We'll do LB, which is list bundles, but as Liferay is made up out of hundreds of bundles, we'll need to filter a little bit, and we'll just look for blogs. And here we have our trusted blogs API, and we'll see as well this is resolved. We'll also see the version here, and we'll see the bundle ID. Now, seeing this bundle ID, we can actually see this and basically just say we'll revert the decision that we did before. So I'll start this bundle, and the API started. Let's double check this with LB blogs that I have just executed again. Let me make this visible for you. There is LB blogs. And the blogs API is active again. Now, as these are your first steps in Gogo Shell, at least in this course, I want to give you one warning ahead. Please don't type with me, but pay attention. You might want to cancel Gogo Shell, disconnect, exit it, and there are two ways to disconnect. One is you just type exit, which asks you if you really want to stop Equinox. Well, trust me, if you now answer yes, you will be out in your regular command shell, but exiting or stopping Equinox means that the whole OSGI runtime is stopped, which means you effectively broke down the server, which is probably not what you want. So no, I don't want this. What I actually want is to disconnect. And there it asks, do you want to disconnect from the console? And the connection is closed. I'm back on my command line. Liferay continues to run. Exit would be roughly equivalent to just pulling the plug from the machine. It's a very disgraceful shutdown. So just be aware, when you operate Gogo Shell, use disconnect. Now, the next chapter in here in the exercises is on configuring locales and user settings. Let's start with some locales, and let's start with global locales in the instance settings. In the instance settings, we can configure under miscellaneous, we can configure the default language. If nobody chooses any other language, this is what we will use. And we can choose the available languages. And you might know that Liferay comes with more than 40 languages, but only a couple of them are active, which are the, I would say, well-maintained languages. And we have a few beta languages which are there, but they are not fully supported. You can enable them, you can correct them, you can contribute these translations, and you can choose one and activate it, bring it onto the current site, or bring some current languages into the available site so that they are no longer current. Now, we can set the default language, and if we do so, just set the language to French, and then hit save. We will set the language to French. And as you can see here, nothing happened. Well, this is all laid out in our material. Nothing happened because every user has their own personal preferences, and the preferences have been set already for the administrative user test. I'll start a private browsing or an incognito mode window, and I'll go to localhost 8081 as well. Now, going to the homepage as an anonymous user, not as the currently logged in user, will bring me the whole user interface in French language where it is translated. So obviously this part is not translated, but a lot of other content here is translated. If I log in here, I will be back on English. Why is that? Well, let me look at this current user, at my own account settings, and here it says my language of preference, my default language is English United States. This has been set when the user account was created, and back then English was the default language. Now I'm going to close this window, this incognito window, and I'm back on my instance settings, which have so far been hidden behind. And just so that everybody understands everything that we see here, I'll be switching the language back to English. And here we are. Next up is the time zone settings. So we'll stay in the instance settings here. And again, in miscellaneous, we'll have the time zone here. And this time zone defaults to Coordinated Universal Time, to UTC, which is my recommendation to have every server running in UTC. Because It's so much easier to calculate different times, different time zones based on time zone that doesn't have any daylight saving times. This is always the central reference. And if you want to know, my server is properly running on UTC. And here you can see when I have recorded it, just after lunch in the time zone UTC. Now, the Liferay server, Liferay's notion of the time should always match the server's notion of the time, so that you can have meaningful authoring, creation, or change dates for your web content, for blog articles, for message board posts, and so on. On every single user's level, I can basically go back into my user and give you some hint here. Now that my server is set to the proper time zone, I can also choose my display settings here and say, I am actually not in universal time. I am located in Germany, which is Central European time. And now whenever I log in and I hit save, whenever I log in, I'll get the time in a way that makes sense to me. Because what do I care where the server is located and what the server does? Next up in the exercises chapter is choosing the language at a site level. Now this is DevOps training, which means we don't create too much content, but we have one site here already with just a single page, and that is the site called Liferay DXP. In its configuration and site settings, we can configure what we want to see in the Languages tab here. We can configure what language we want to see for this site. There's a default, which is, we'll just use what everybody uses in this portal. These are the global settings that you have just seen. And of course, we can go with a custom language, that is a custom default language, and we can choose from the languages that are globally available and configured, make some of them unavailable, because we might not expect to translate content on this site to any of these languages or to many of these languages. So we can now select or deselect several of these languages, and they won't be available for this site anymore. Now the exercises continue with some settings for the user's personal site and user's personal page. And as I said in the course already, I consider this being content, so I'll choose to use this as bonus material. Take a look at it if this is the level of detail that you are dealing with. For a DevOps person, I would say this is out of scope. It is rather something that anybody dealing with the actual content of a site will deal with. What I want to continue is I want to go to a control panel configuration and just give you a glimpse of the system settings that you find here. And these system settings are all of the OSGI configuration admin settings where you can configure individual components in Liferay, individual modules or applications that have all of their configuration in here. A little bit later, when we configure, for example, Elasticsearch, we will see that we can import and export these settings and that we can not only configure this through the user interface, but we can also configure it through available files. Those are text files that we can store externally, that we can export from this system and then import again. This is coming up when we deal with an external Elasticsearch implementation, for example. For now, you can click around, you can see instance settings in here, you can basically just browse around and, well, take a look. For now, we are going to make use of them later. As I said, there will be plenty of opportunity. Just be aware, this is a big place of configuration where you can configure several defaults for Liferay outside of Portal X properties. That concludes this exercise chapter. I hope it made sense to you. As always, these exercises are completely optional. You can also just go through the written material and explore everything for yourself. But if you don't have the installation available, if you just want to sit back, relax, and get it clicked through for you, well, I'll be happy to provide that service.